Another game, another defeat, and after falling flat yet again, this time to the box, we have a lot of weeds to come through. Let's start the show. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Inch Pro Show, your home for all things Irish rugby across the professional and amateur men's and women's game. We have Adam and David with us so far. We are hoping that Ben will arrive at some stage, but we shall see as we reflect on a disappointing loss to South Africa on Saturday. And out of fairness, because David was there, I'm not going to ask you to start things off. I'll let you just ease into it a little bit because it must have been tricky. It must a lot of people just said it was a very weird game, and I understand that. So Adam, from your perspective, watching on presumably TNT Sports,
Yeah,
what did you make of this one?
bizarre. Bizarre. It sort of like lost the run of itself, but then again, I can't help but think like it sort of went in favor of whoever. Like it was just bizarre. Like you had the first 5 minutes, with Zulu, nearly taking the head off someone, and then went to the TMO. Referee stopped it and went, nah, there's no need for a card, guys. And then that was almost like someone had like a monkey hand going like that. And then the rest of the
For
game,
those on audio, he means the monkey paw curl thing.
the monkey paw
Yeah.
curl thing, yeah. It was one of those where you're like, all right, okay, maybe he's gonna be a bit lenient. Maybe World Rugby's changed. And then for the preceding, I don't know how many minutes we played with, like we played like 40 minutes in total without without 14, like without the full 15 on the pitch. I've never seen a game that's so lost its run of itself in terms of discipline. But yeah, it was just bizarre. And there were some points where I was just like, oh, this can't get any weirder. And then South Africa pretty much played a a bang average game. Like they should have scored way more with less players on the pitch. You'd have thought that. But no, it was sort of like canceling each other out in levels of what else can go wrong about this game. This is the weirdest game. It was one of the weirdest games I've ever watched. I can't imagine what it was like in the stadium for David, but I can just imagine it was really weird. And like having commentary to try and explain what's happening was another thing as well. You're just like, oh,
Did it not do a good job? Is that what you're implying here?
not that they didn't do a good job. I think they were struggling to try and make reason with it themselves. I think the referee on the actual the microphone on the TV explained it quite well in terms of like you're intentionally doing this, so I'm going to put a stop to it immediately and yellow card. And that's when the yellow cards start coming out for like I think it was Crawley sort of lazy arm, and then we had the two tens two tens on the sin bin, which made Mac Hansen at 10 and also Bundyaki at 8 for Ireland. So there's a couple of things that went really weird, but yeah, it was bizarre. I can imagine as a neutral, it was very entertaining to watch, but as a fan, I was just really confused.
Yeah, it was Bizarro World
Yeah.
times like 10, like even just the fact that the first half took an hour, when Crowley gets his yellow card, Keane Prendergast's about to come on, so Ireland go down to 12 momentarily, and then there's another card not long after, and it's like it's just such a mess, and it starts with that O'Brien incident, which should have been a card, and like I tweeted it, I stand by it. I don't think Matthew Carley had a bad game. I do think he got that call in particular wrong. The tackle from Sasha Feinberg and Gomzulu on Tommy O'Brien. Everything else I thought he was okay. But actually, and we'll be talking about the scrum in a minute, I actually think he penalised the wrong person in the second half for the scrums. I actually thought Paddy McCarthy got penalised for engaging, whereas Finlay Bealham was flopping to the ground, hoping to get a reset, hoping to get whatever. To me, that's worse. But obviously, Dixon was McCarthy's side as well, so he was probably looking at it that way. But yeah, it was just such a strange game, and that's everyone's sense, isn't it, David? That like this was billed as like this is the clash, this is whatever, and everyone left feeling like, what in the name of goodness have we just witnessed over the last 2 hours and 10 minutes?
Yeah.
It was an intensely confusing game. Like even being at it, like I hadn't obviously I'm there, so I'm watching it and I hadn't kept track that you tell me the first half took an hour makes sense. It felt incredibly long. Now I will say it felt incredibly engaging as well. I do think it's a more engaging spectacle when you're not winning, when you're on the edge. We weren't possibly weren't being smashed completely out the gate. I was looking back over results and I was like, well, they scored less against us than they did against France, so small mercies. But like it was a game where it felt like we were like right there while never really feeling like we were going to win it. The atmosphere was good in that both sets of crowds, and there was a very strong Springbok support there. Were very engaged, and Matthew Carley can have had no question about how any of his decisions, excuse me, went across because the crowd was in no uncertain terms to let him know just how they felt about it. Um, for my own piece, I think the one of the strangest things for me was looking at the clock. I think it was 70 minutes and realizing it's 70 minutes and we're still in touch. It didn't feel like we should be at that stage with the four yellow cards, the red card, the eight. I don't. I want to say it was 18 penalties. Like
18
it's
penalties, yeah,
it's
six at the
hard to
scrum.
believe we were still, in that final 10 minutes on an attack and one try away from it being a one score game, a 4 point game. Like it was a very, very, very odd spectacle. And yeah, like we all remember like the two games down in South Africa last year were good, but I think the 2023 World Cup pool clash has to go down as one of the most titanic fights between the two, where they were just both at an incredibly high level, and Ireland just got the edge. And I hope everyone who watched that game remembers the very last play of that game was a maul very close to Ireland's line that we somehow managed to hold up and turn the ball over. Like
Tag Burn
it was
coming up clutch again.
so close to going the other way. Like that's a title fight. This was something else. This was a really weird mud wrestle while an Englishman watched on. It was a very strange game.
Can I butt in there for a split second, David? Because you watch more rugby than myself and Adam, and that's not like a slight or anything. You just do. You watch more than the two of us. Is there a case to be made that like all the tinkering of the laws has led us to a weekend like this as well? Because like I think it was Will Slattery made the point on the Indo. It's like we had such a good product in 2023. Even
Yeah.
like the low key games were like pretty poor. And I'm not talking about the scrums. I love a good scrum. I love a good maul. But just a general sense, it's like rugby was so close. It was so close to breaking, like to just tipping over the iceberg of perfection. And now it's like,
Yeah.
oh, some of these games are just tough to watch. And this game was, yes, it was engaging, but it was also kind of tough to watch. And so was like so many other games over the autumn where I don't know, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a weird one, and I think it's that no one change necessarily is what did it, but we've ended up in a weird kind of situation with a lot of emergent properties. We've definitely ended up in a situation where kicking seems to be much more rewarded.
It's the meta
Um,
of the game now again, isn't it?
and nobody likes kick tennis. Like a good kick is good because it should stand out in and of itself. But just to watch lads belting the ball back and forth in the hopes that somebody's going to blink is not fun. The change to the escorting laws, I think the idea there was to encourage competitions in the air. The problem is that we now have incredibly tight restrictions on any kind of aerial contact. Andrew Osborne fell afoul of that in a Leinster game recently where he would argue that he did go up in the air, he just didn't go as high as his opposition, and he ends up getting a red card. So that kind of thing then leads players to be less inclined to directly compete. And even when two players do get up and compete, I always remember that Rob Kearney Lions test where he just established himself as one of the forces in terms of fullback play. And it was up and he would catch every ball, taking balls every single time. Mac Hansen did it in Australia. But more and more now, because of the the way the escorting works, we're rewarding the slapback a lot more as well. So it just feels like, and even in the lineup, it feels like there's a lot less clean ball in the game. And I don't know exactly why that is, but yeah, it feels like a messier, scraggier, less exciting game. It feels like we've disincentivized phase play. And that definitely comes across in Ireland's attack, which I'll talk later. It feels like you go, if you're out there, you go 1-2, kick the ball. That's kind of the way it is now, and that's rewarded. The scrum, I like a good scrum. I feel like maybe South Africa possibly overdid it a little bit. Just from a spectator's point of view, and it's not even really the penalties. The penalties obviously are a frustration if you're on the receiving end of them. the resets. I would be much happier. I would almost take more penalties or more free kicks over resets. I hate scrum resets. I think everybody hates scrum resets because he turns the clock off and you don't know how long it's going to be before it comes back on. Um, but yeah, I think we just want flowing rugby and seeing players kick that much and that being the more rewarded style. Yeah, it does feel like I don't know. It just doesn't feel as fun anymore.
Yeah.
You still do get it a little bit, but it seems to be more player dependent. Like if a breakdown happens, it's because France have a really fast guy in the center, or because Italy have their Montioni on a wing doing something mad, or or South Africa with any of their backline. More so than the systems really rewarding that style of play. The systems reward kicking and heavy and yeah, it's definitely led to a
It's
product that feels like a step back from where we were 2 years ago, which is never how you want to feel.
no, there's an air of uniformity around Test rugby at the moment. I feel like
Yeah.
everyone's playing a very similar brand, whereas 2023 you had this unbelievable Jouet French team, more counter transition, but more on ball than anyone else. England and South Africa were very kick heavy. Ireland were the definition of perfect counter transition rugby. New Zealand were New Zealand, and it was a lovely mix. Whereas now it's like, yeah, the kicking game is so overpowered at the moment, and the line out is the most important thing in the game as well. Now they've tweaked that, and obviously with the contestable in the air, it's a little bit different, but it is interesting to see which way it goes because we are so early in the season as well. World Rugby will reserve the right to make any tweaks before the Six Nations or midway through the club season we've seen before. So that should be interesting as it goes along and as it pans out. But I suppose to get into the meat and two veg of it all, Adam, I'm going to start with you. Ireland had a 100% record on their own scrum feed, but they had two props yellow carded. They conceded six penalties. There was four advantages not used. I'm pretty sure by South Africa, if not three. Neil Tracy was the one to tweet that. It was an obliteration, a pummeling, a massacre. And as Ian Madigan so succinctly put it, South Africa were playing cat and mouse with Ireland. They were playing with them at this stage.
Yeah, so I was just reading up there what Rugby Pass said about it. They said that 12.6 scrums per game at the Rugby Championship went past, and the Springboks in this game alone had 15 feeds in terms of like how many games they've had in that. In total, yes, as you said, eight penalties conceded, four by Porter and four by McCarthy. I would have thought there was a bit more by Porter, to be perfectly honest with you. I thought McCarthy came on and really steadied the ship well. But yeah, it was just really like it was the example of Razzie Erasmus's really keen eye to detail in the fact that he pointed out a big issue in our scrum is how Andrew Porter sort of shifts his weight onto one side if he's struggling to scrum, and their tight head just went in for it. And having eight scrum penalties conceded is, to be fair for Ireland, probably one of our worst scrummaging performances that we could do. I know that we had 100% of our ball, but we only had four scrums compared to that. Like, of course, it's the way that they feed the ball in. There's that old talk now about actually checking where the scrum half feeds it in because, nine times out of 10, if that was in the middle, we would have probably gotten pummeled again. So, yeah, it was really interesting how, you know, South Africa made a complete like dinner out of us. Their scrum was incredible to watch. And there was times where our scrum just went back, like just went completely back and just disintegrated out the back. You don't really see that in internationals. You see that more in club rugby, I feel. But to
Yeah.
have that in an international quality of game when we are like in the top five of the world and they're number one, they quite clearly are number one. That was just mental to me. But yeah, I feel like the scrums were just completely demolished. Like South Africa did what they could well. They targeted their man, they targeted the loose. And when Finlay Bealham came on, I think you're right at the before with when Finlay Bealham just kept on flopping. He just kept on flopping. And it's almost like to a degree you want your props to play the referee But when we have so many penalties against us, you don't want to play the referee because he will 9 times out of 10 be like, oh, it's probably the loose head again. That tight head's playing so well. Because that's what the referees do. You don't say it's bias, you just say it's the way that they're reffing the game. If
And they
one
can only
player,
see one side at a time as well. The focus was on that side with McCarthy or Porter against Lower Dutoy, and it was just, and like what's most worrying is 2012, the famous Tom Court game. You'll remember it, Adam, in particular, where he went in a tight head. Declan Kidney stood up and he was like, "This was hard to watch. This was really tough to take."
yeah,
Um, and this like English, I can't remember who the English loose head was at the time. Probably Corbisiero if it was
just like this.
2012.
Yeah.
Probably him. But it was like, oh, this is bad. Like 2 weeks later, a national scrum coach was being advertised by the IRFU. Fast forward to now, and we're hearing it's the feeds, and it's the driving angle, and it's just the box being clever. And uh, for any non-Irish listeners, a famous phrase around here is cute tourism. Um, HOOR, to make sure it's PG. And like that's the kind of like mantra here where it's like, no, this was a genuine saturation and killing of the Irish scrum. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also worrying because Thomas Tutoy plays Munster in 2 weeks. Wilco Low and Gertner Steenkamp play all of the provinces this season for the Bulls, and Bonaventure play the provinces for Edinburgh. So you're in that situation where you're like, well, sorry, actually, Ulster have already beaten the Bulls. I
We're
should
beat
point
the
out.
Bulls and the
But
Sharks.
you're in that situation where it's like, oh my God, we have to play these guys. Like it's not, there's no hiding from it. That not may not be a bad thing though, as well. And David, like, I might bring you in here. I suppose what I'm trying to say is if we just take it in the right way and we learn from it and we don't have this like I'm gonna say the line, but like the line that was on TNT commentary of, oh, it was the best 11-point loss I've ever seen. As long as we don't take that attitude to the scrums and we learn from it, good, because it's good that Paddy McCarthy got his wings. The same way it would be for Scott Wilson or for whoever else. It's good every once in a while. Yes, this was very much one end of the spectrum, but you do need this as well sometimes.
Yeah, well, you always tend to learn more from fights you lose than from fights you win. And this, yeah, it'll be a proving ground for Paddy, no doubt. I mean, that he's so young. But he's been picked. The reason I was given that I've heard mentioned that he was fast tracked is they had a training session between the seniors and the under 20s, and he was tearing strips out of the senior lads as an under 20, and Andy Farrell kind of went, this is the guy I want. So like. Yeah, it's a tricky one for me because the scrum was so obviously an issue. We were so obviously dominated. We were dominated by the team in the world that is like always judged to be the best at the scrum. It's to say South Africa had a dominant scrum. It's like, well, yeah, of course they did. Like and rain is wet. Like, but it's not a surprise. I think the frustration for Ireland is probably that frustration slash concern is that if you go, well, Andrew Porter didn't have a good day at the scrum. Yeah, definitely. The penalties were warranted. The yellow card is the end result of those. I don't know that there's a ready-made someone to slot in. And, if you wanted to go even a layer deeper, you can make the point that the way that Irish rugby is not, and this isn't Andy Farrell, I mean, Irish rugby as a whole approach to scrummaging is different. I know that we don't scrummage quite at the same level at underage levels, the way that the South Africans do. They kind of live and breathe the scrum. It is their bread and butter.
We only do
That
proper
being
scrummaging at 17, essentially.
yeah, that being said, it doesn't usually lead to an 18 penalty, two yellow card capitulation. So there's an element of yes, we were always going to be on the weaker side of this, but at the same time, this shouldn't be what happens. And like, look, at the end of the day, there was a perfect storm effect there. Andrew Porter's not the strongest scrummer in the world. He lost James Ryan behind him early on to a yellow and then red card. Ryan Baird comes up into the second row, and that's not a position that he has a ton of familiarity with at that level. Um, we already had, once it goes against you, the tide kind of turns, and when the referee is always on that side of the scrum watching what's happening there, it can be hard to start painting different pictures, which is why you have to paint a positive picture early. Um, so yeah, it's there's definitely stuff there that we should, yeah, and I would agree. Yeah, the takeaway from this shouldn't be we can win in other areas of the pitch. We can win in other areas of the pitch, but you don't want to cut off your legs when this is a part of the game that is so essential and can be so easily weaponized against you. We were in the last 20 minutes of that game. I was watching every passage of play, not necessarily to see how our attack was going, but to go, please don't overplay and knock the ball on, because for God's sake, I don't want us to have another scrum. That was the thing. I was like, if that happens, it'll be 10 more minutes of resets and penalties until somebody else gets a yellow card. And to have that kind of massive weakness would be difficult to overcome on your best day. So I don't know what the exact lesson from this is. We do already have scrum coaches, and Andrew, we have scrum coaches at the provincial level as well. So I don't know what the easy fix is, and that's probably the unfortunate thing. There is no quick fix to this. There's layers right down to the youth level, and whether or not anything can be done there, or whether or not anything should be done there. We didn't make the decision not to allow people under 17 to scrummage properly for no reason. There is a method to that. Um, but yeah, it's an unfortunate one in that it's not just a straight, pick this player over that player kind of decision. There are eight of them in there, or in this case, there were more often seven of them in there. And yeah, there's a mix of system and player issues that need to be addressed, but they do need to be addressed because South Africa are not the only big team out there in the world. France are waiting for us in Paris in the Six Nations. They're big boys who love to scrummage too. So we can't be leaving that big an Achilles tendon sized hole in our uh, in our defensive framework. Or other teams are going to find a way to capitalize on it too.
Genuinely. And like that was one of the things I was going to say. It's like maybe sometimes you can kick a can down the road, whether it's line out or scrum or whatever. But your next game is France. 2 weeks after that, it's England. Then you play Wales, who actually did a really good number on Ireland's scrum earlier on the year. Nicky Smith is one of the best scrummagers in the URC. But you did say there, it was so funny. I put up my hand and I realized if I really wanted to butt in, I could just mute you. I have those powers on a Zoom call. I wouldn't do it. But when you were saying like, what's the answer? Like, who do we select? I'm like, Jeremy Luckman did a number on Wilco Lowe recently. Now, he didn't win six scrum penalties against him. I'm not saying that. But Wilco Lowe was a genuine problem when he was on the field, and Jeremy Luckman has handled him before. And you look at things like that, you look at, say, Porter and even Paddy McCarthy and Finlay Bealham, and we get told these lads aren't necessarily picked for their scrummaging, it's their all-round game. Well, if it's all-round game, maybe you have Lookman in there just as a break glass in case of emergency. Oh, our scrum's getting pummeled. We'll have him ready to go. Or if it is, we want lads with more pop in the carry, then why hasn't Scott Wilson gotten a go? And that's the thing. I just haven't been able to square that circle in my head over the weekend of like, and I 100%, like as we both said, you can't just explain away and be like, oh, it's fine. Like it'd be fine. There has been a little bit of that from Ireland with the scrums, and it's kind of like in 2022, it was Reynald's fault. In 2023, it was Barnes's fault. For some people, no one here, for some people, it was Carly's fault this time. You can't proceed like that. It has to be looked at. And I genuinely hope Ireland do. And I think if Ireland do continue to have this like non-focus on scrums, or even on line out or whatever else, or on tight head lock or on centres, all of these issues are going to bubble up above the surface eventually. And we will get on to looking back at the autumn as a whole right after this. But Adam, just for a closing word on the forward play, it's also important to note, like, yes, South Africa have big forwards and they're very, very good. But they have big forwards who can tackle. They have big forwards who can disrupt the line out as well. And like one of my not favorite moments for any given reason apart from admiration for this player, but Peter Steph late tackle on Sam Prendergast near the end, for the pure fact that he did not get a chance to lay a finger on Sam Prendergast all game. But when it came to the end and he got that chance, he took it because that's the mindset South Africa were in. And again, the whole cat and mouse thing, they had such a focus and a desire And there's a reason why a lot of people felt after about 20 minutes, oh yeah, South Africa are going to win this because they just had that steeliness in their eyes. And that's one of the reasons they are undoubtedly, hands down, the best team in the world right now.
Yeah, they showed like once they were able to buckle down and they had that sort of fight in them, it was sort of like when we watched them against France at the start of this this sort of autumn. Like once they're determined, once they're fighting, they've taken so many big scalps to this Northern Hemisphere tour as well. Their pack was motoring. Like I feel like for an Ireland fan having no second row on the bench really proved to be a fatal error in terms of, Andy, I know that he can't predict red cards, he can't predict injuries, but in this sport that it is, and in this current climate, losing a second row and replacing him with Ryan Baird, who has had a really good Nations Cup, like Autumn Nations, I feel like him going into second row where he's not as comfortable really showed in that sort of scrummaging as well when it comes like that widened the gap even more for South Africa. But their pack was incredible to watch. It was just such a joy. Etzebeth and what's the other second row called? The one
Etzebeth was alongside
third.
not here.
Not sure, yeah.
Yes, he was phenomenal. I just thought like watching him play as well, it's just explosiveness off it as well. You really do have to respect the level that South Africa got to beat us, whilst also considering that that wasn't probably the level. Like they were so focused on winning that when they were winning, they almost put their foot off because they were like so focused on winning almost. There was a couple of kicks that went a bit askew, but yeah, they were determined and yeah, as you said, best team in the world.
And undoubtedly at that. And look, this was a game of long proportions. Like I couldn't think of anything else to say at this point. But one of the things you want to touch on, David, as your takeaways, is the Irish attack. I spoke about this, wrote about this. I don't know, wrote about this in a piece for All Things Rugby. There are question marks at the moment, and you're going to take us through some of them.
Yeah, I suppose the main question for me is, and like we can even touch back on what we said about the scrum, that if these players who are not being picked for the scrummaging ability, they're being picked for other talents. They do then have to show those other talents to justify that selection. If you want to say that, Jeremy Lockman is maybe can scrummage better than Porter, but Porter is a better all-field player, then he has to be a better all-field player to justify the to continuing to be picked. Yeah, I guess it's been an ongoing frustration, like of me watching Ireland in that. Um, when it came to the Japan and Australia games, against weakened opposition, we were able to open up space, we were able to create it. But South Africa, and like to be fair to the issue, South Africa was always going to be a more difficult prospect. They kind of pride themselves on their defense. But I think the frustration for me, it really coalesced in the last 10 minutes. We only scored the one try in the rest of the game. I think up until that point, the balance of possession was very heavily with the Boks, or certainly felt that way. It felt like penalties were going against Ireland, cards were going against Ireland. The opportunity to attack was not there. It was a very defensive focused game. When it came into that last 10 minutes, if we'd scored at the start of those 10 minutes, we would have had the opportunity to win this game. Even by the end, it was a minute or two to go. And I thought, if we score here, it's a 4 point game. It's probably not, you could argue up and down whether or not it's fair of if we deserve to only win by 4 points, but I thought that would have been an acceptable end. And Ireland had what should have been a perfect platform. They had a string of penalties. That balance finally started to shift over to themselves in rapid succession. They had a kick over into the right hand corner from Maul. They had two tap and goes in the middle of the field from various positions taken by Ronan Kelleher, and they showed no imagination. It was, let's run at the line and hope things work. And then when it doesn't, let's throw the ball wide. Sam Prendergast always loves a big floaty wide pass, but he was going way over the top in the hopes that it would find someone. And unfortunately, with these floaty passes, when you're that close to the line, it takes so long to get there. By the time it does, there's usually a defender out there too. Craig Casey attempted the scrum half famous, behind the back, whip it wide pass to much the same effect. And it's just frustrating to have us in that position where you're like, okay, you now finally have this opportunity to show us something, to have some kind of some plan. And it really felt with Ireland in the other areas of the pitch when they're not that close to the line, that the plan is you carry maybe two or three phases. If it doesn't work, you either whip the ball wide or you kick. And that was kind of what the attack tended to break down to. When you're that close to the line, obviously you need something more concrete. But the number of times when Ireland really, you really felt like if you just pick and go like a few more times, compress the defense, like this should be very standard. And they did it with Caolán or with Dan Sheehan's try. There were 13 players on the pitch and they were able to do it then, which really begs the question then at the other end of the pitch, with so little time to go and South Africa surely tiring, obviously the Irish lads are tired too. The lack of invention, the lack of idea, the lack of I don't know. Like I have a friend who used to play rugby for Boyne Hooker. Shout out Jerry. We were talking about the game afterwards, and he said it's an old phrase in rugby, but we used to say you have to earn the right to go wide. And it feels like Ireland don't work to earn that right anymore. They go wide way too early. And the result is that the defense is still wide enough spread to catch them because they haven't put enough forward pressure directly in the middle of the pitch. And maybe it's the fact that we didn't have Joe McCarthy in the team. James Ryan was gone quite early on. Um, that we didn't have someone, but like this is the kind of thing where you want someone like Andrew Porter to step up. You want someone like Jack Conan or Caelan Doris to step up, a hard carrier. And it just felt like we didn't have someone who is able to do that kind of hard carrying. In the centres, you'd be usually looking to Bundy Aki to do the same thing. Stuart McCluskey, that was what he was such a revelation when he played at the start of this series because he was doing that. He was making gain line. And the result of that was the defenses were compressing in around him because they had to stop him getting across. And then, Mac Hansen's tries, that space was created by the forward pressure of Stuart McCluskey's carries. In the absence of that, there is no pressure at the point of the carry, so there's no pressure at wide. And so there is no hole for you to get through. And I think the thing that frustrates me is that Ireland, particularly under Joe Schmidt, as well as being a technically competent team, they were a clever team. They had plans, they had ideas, they had moves. I always think of Jack Conan's the throw to the back of the line out and Jack Conan's throw back inside for Keith Earls to shoot through the hole. Beautifully executed. You can't do it every time, but when you pull it off, it's fantastic. Hugo Keenan's try against France off the goal line dropout, where James Hull gives the pass inside Caelan Doris, and he's so sure the move is going to come off, he starts to do his hair because he knows he doesn't have any part to play in the rest of the move. But we had ideas. At this stage, it just didn't seem like we did. And maybe it's a plan. Maybe the long-term goal is you're 2 years out from World Cup. This is not the time to try anything fancy. But there's a frustration in watching this. And we said this before that if you're going to go for the win always strategy, you have to win all the time to continue to justify that strategy. If you're not going to win all the time, you need to make it enjoyable anyway. You need to have your fans come away and go, that was still an enjoyable match to watch. I'm still happy with the caliber of rugby. And while I'm reasonably happy with some of the defensive performances, just in terms of being down so many men and being under pressure for so long, an element of that is also that South Africa were so intent on putting pressure on the scrum that they didn't take points that they should have taken. They didn't go to the corner when they probably should have gone to the corner. They probably could have run that scoreline up a bit higher if they hadn't been so focused on just punishing Ireland at the scrum. But in the absence of actually winning the game, you know, there was the attack just didn't feel like it didn't feel like there was the intent there. And it's a really frustrating thing to be at the end of the game and go, this doesn't matter. Even if we score here, we're not going to win and they're not going to lose. And yet still their will to defend is outweighing our will to score. And that's a massive frustration. And that I think, unlike what we said about the scrum earlier with not being an easy fix, I'm not saying it's an easy fix, but that should be an obvious one. It's like there has to be, Andrew Goodman is hopefully in there for a reason. They have sports psychologists, they have attitude in there, and they should have leaders. Andy Farrell said this in one of his press conferences before the match that one of his focuses is going to be on going to his leaders. I'm going to people like Dan Sheehan, who's captain Ireland. I'm going to Caelan Doris. I'm going to Ty Furlong. I'm going. You're the leaders. You're there to lead. You have to lead now. If you don't, serious questions then have to be asked about why you're the one I'm trusting to lead the team. So I kind of went beyond the attack, but that was kind of my take on that whole side of the play because we were being punished so much in the scrum. If we could make up for it in other parts of the game, that'd be fantastic, but we didn't. And even when the
Yeah.
opportunity came to us, we didn't seem able or ready to take it, and
And
ultimately
then
that's
you're
why we
fatigued
lost.
as
And then you're
well. It's
fatigued.
probably the last thing to throw in there. Like when it actually came to playing some rugby near the end, when the result was kind of beyond doubt, Ireland were out in their feet. They were absolutely gassed
You
from the
spent
South
70
African
minutes being
effort.
mushed in the scrum. I'm sure their legs were like jelly.
Ah,
What the
if I
backs,
went 7 seconds munching the scrum, my legs would
yeah,
be like jelly. So I'm not one to
what
talk,
what
but
what the backs were doing that whole time, I have no idea.
oh
Stretches or
no idea.
something, I suppose. But
Yeah, probably.
yeah,
I mean, you were there. You probably have a better idea than I, But no, but no. Look, it's the nature of the game too, isn't it? Like but, it takes a bit out of you. But I suppose just to move on, like to kind of put a bow on it, is a great phrase that a lot of presenters like to use. To put a bow on it, to wrap things up. Ireland leave 2024. 11 games played, 8 wins. Those three losses were to New Zealand, France, and South Africa by a combined 39 points, though, however. Third in the Six Nations, 2 from 4 in the autumn, makes it the worst autumn in 12 years, which in and of itself says something that Ireland have only ever had one loss in an autumn campaign for the last 12 years, or the last 11 years, whatever it might be. 55 players used. Now a lot of new caps, but of course the vast majority of those came in the summertime. So you're only looking at Jack Boyle, Tom Farrell, and is that eight that weren't capped in the summer? Um, Unless there's anyone else who's not coming to mind. Tommy Bryan was obviously summer as well.
Um,
So,
Connacht Center.
well, I said Tom Farrell, so
You. Oh, well.
I said Tom Farrell, so
Oh,
he's the
who's
only
the?
one.
Oh yeah, no.
But anyway, that's only a small bit, anyways. Adam, Ireland's 2024, if you were to give it a grade, and I'm not saying this because you teach, if you were to give it a grade, what would it be?
I would correct you on 2025
Oh,
first.
sorry,
Yeah.
2025, I meant just 20.
As a teacher, I'd have to correct you. Anyway, if I was to give it a grade, I'd give it a. It'd be like a C plus. It would be like not quite, not quite a B. It's not one of those that I'm like necessarily excited for the Six Nations. It's the Six Nations that we could easily, I don't think easily win. We could easily be second or we could easily be fifth. That's the feeling, there's no in between. I feel like with looking at all the other nations and how they've done this autumn, I'm quite frightened looking at all the other nations, to be honest with you. Um, I look towards England and the fact that we're playing them in England, like in London and Twickenham, and I feel like that's not gonna be as difficult as game.
On the third week of the bounce for the first time in Six Nations history is well, not Six Nations history, but in modern history as well. So like that will could be a factor. Could be a factor for either side. Do you know?
Yeah, it could be like I feel like what we need to see like next year is change. I feel like we're really predictable, and I think Razzie Erasmus really pulled the strings there. And as David said, our attack looking sort of one-dimensional whilst the fatigue sets in. I feel like uh, pointing towards the attack, it was like the last 10 minutes, and you had the man who should not be named saying, "Oh, there's a way you can lose this. There's definitely no way you can win this. There's a way you can lose this." And that sort of put me as a viewer watching it going, I think we were towards our own try line and us flinging it out to the backs around. And I'm going, none of the backs can run. I feel like our pace and our speed is something that we need to focus on as well. I feel like for our backs and looking at every other back line, including South Africa's back line, they just seemed really quick. We didn't seem quick, even when we weren't fatigued. We tried to like push and like tried to push and pull over everything. But yeah, I'd say C plus, not bang average, but not as bang average. It's a little bit better than bang average, give or
Yeah.
take.
I could go through every single detail, but again, if you want to read my own thoughts, I have it on all things rugby. I think the highest I gave anything was a B minus, and I think that's fair. Like the standards have been raised, and the reason that the likes of those comments about like, oh, there's a way to lose, and it's brave, and it's this like ultimately the standards are a lot higher than they were 12 years ago. And as someone else said, like we didn't have internet in the 80s, but that doesn't mean if the internet went down that we wouldn't all lose our minds. Do you know, like standards change, things change, attitudes change. So yeah, I don't know what letter I didn't do an overall grade for Ireland's year. I don't know where I'd land, but it wouldn't be an A or B. It's probably a C plus, to be honest. And I think that's the annoying thing. And like as I said, I don't want to keep plugging. I'll jump off in a second. Like I don't want to get to the end of next year with Nations Championship and whatever and feel like, oh my goodness, we've kind of lost 3 years. We haven't really done like yes, won a Six Nations 24. Fantastic achievement. It was a two-horse race. We were guaranteed top two. I think we get top two regardless that year. So I don't want to leave, that's obviously way down the line. David, for yourself, like it's so hard, and especially when obviously there was three coaches in the three different windows. Do you know, like that's a factor. And Ireland did lead France in the second half of a de facto Grand Slam decider in round four back in March. But if you judge the best teams on the best games, it's hard to be too nice. I'm not gonna say positive. It's hard to be too nice. Do you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And like, there were several well, not records, but like the whatever the opposite of a record is. There were several things like Ireland tend not to lose more than two home games a year. You could argue up and down whether or not Chicago is a home game. Or like to lose two in the Autumn Nations, even to lose more than two games a year, full stop. All of this year, the only proper. Oh, I'm going to really insult a lot of people here. The only team that maybe it would have been acceptable for Ireland to lose to that they didn't lose to were England, and England have only gotten better since that game. In fact, I think England have lost since that game. That was when their 11 game streak started. Every other team that Ireland could have acceptably lost to, I don't think we could have acceptably lost to Australia. Even with the steps they've taken, I don't think that would have been an acceptable situation. But New Zealand, South Africa, France, and we lost all three of them. And you can argue up and down. Obviously, the France game was the worst of the three. I'd actually argue the New Zealand performance was way more dire. This was probably the best of the three, for whatever that's worth, to only lose by 11 points in the weirdest game any of us have ever watched. But it's just it's a year of every time if it was every time it was a coin flip, the coin landed on tails. And look, if that only happens one year, that's okay. And I did make the point of saying if you have to put a positive spin on it, we're 2 years out from the World Cup. If the World Cup is all we ever care about, if there's a time to have a dip, this is the time to have the dip. Rassie Erasmus only took over South Africa 2 years out from the 2019 World Cup. Ireland only really started to get good 2 years after Andy Farrell took over. Obviously, he's now been in situ for longer, so you have to ask what kind of innovation he's bringing. He's brought in Andrew Goodman. There's been a little bit of change around there in the coaching staff, but I think it kind of goes back to what we said a few weeks ago. They kind of earned a little bit back with Japan and Australia, but there isn't a massive amount of reserve goodwill with the team. It's kind of like they're earning their dinner every time they play now, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing because it means you live and die by your decisions. If you're too comfortable, it can encourage complacency, and I don't think Ireland will feel particularly comfortable anymore. It'll be very interesting now to see them all go back to their respective provinces. Connacht probably had the most standard performance in terms of what they usually expect out of the starts of their season. Munster and Ulster still, well, obviously Ulster will be frustrated to have lost the game, dropped the one match, but like Ulster and Munster are still riding quite high. Leinster just about scraping their way into the top eight, and even then you cannot count it because there's teams below them that could pass them with the games they have in hand. So it'll be very interesting to see. I do think, I think I said it to you and I said it to other people as well. Like 5 weeks worth of changed form isn't enough to completely overhaul a squad, but half a season or a season's worth of changed performances, particularly with more interpros to come, could well be enough to change a
Yeah.
squad.
Or,
And
or
in a few,
arguably 13 months in green because last autumn wasn't great. Now, as you said, you're not judging them solely on Irish performances, as you're kind of,
yeah,
you would add, but like it is 13 months for Ireland. And like,
yeah,
just because it is in my head now, you mentioned coaching staff. Um, I would not be surprised if Andrew Goodman departs. There's a vacant role in New Zealand with the lad he used to work with in the
yeah,
Crusaders. But even at that, I'm like, Andy Farrell has been with this team for 9 years. Paul O'Connell stepped away for 4 years, but he was with them since 2002. Simon Easterby stepped away for about 5 or 6 years. But like, there's such a link. Like, it feels like there's there's a concern of staleness that could just be kicking
Yeah.
in the messaging as well, and I think that's a genuine fear. I don't think
It's
anyone can argue that at the moment.
It's the downside of continuity is,
Yeah,
there's, continuity works when you're winning. Again, it's a lot of things. A lot of things work if you're winning, and then once you're not, you question them. And I think it's easy to say that and go, "Oh, if we were winning, you wouldn't be questioning these things." Like, yeah, because you'd be winning, but you're not. So we are. Like that. That is the results do change the conversation, and
and that's
I think
everything. That's the
it is
ticket
it is everything.
prices
It's
and the
absolutely everything.
representation and like
Yeah,
everything ties into that. When you're winning, you can excuse it. Not
yeah,
even excuse it, but you can overlook it.
yeah,
But when you're not winning as much, you are looking at, oh, this is an empty seat there, and
yeah,
oh, there's no lads from Ulster in this squad, and like it just becomes like it becomes an insane pressure. And
yeah,
maybe now is a good time to bring it up. I do think Ireland looked like a team under pressure in the last
yeah.
2 weeks in particular. Like
They did.
seriously. And
They
you can you can use the phrase riot act all you like. Sick of it. That doesn't
Yeah,
matter. What matters is what happens on the field. Ultimately,
yeah,
like and I always come back to this. Rugby is a niche sport. The amount of people watching or listening to a podcast like this or the Indo or the 42 is nothing compared to how many watch on TV. They don't care if Andy Farrell read the riot act. They won't read
no,
it. They won't think about it. They care about the performance on the pitch. And that's where it's like you can have all this pressure, but ultimately
yeah.
it's the 80 minutes, or in this case, what felt like about 800 minutes.
Yeah.
That's all that
And
matters.
it'll be very interesting to see how it comes around next year because as much as we
Mm.
do, I think like to see change. Um, even the other serious teams don't tend to rotate as much for the Six Nations because when rubber hits road, the Six Nations can be where you make a lot of your money. That is where the majority of that money comes from. If that starts to become a problem, like third this year was already a frustrating drop off from what Ireland had been used to in the previous number of seasons. So if that starts to drop off, that's real pressure. That's of a different
Yeah.
sort to the on-field sort, but no less real. When money is as important as it is.
And I genuinely hope, and I mean this as an Irish fan, I genuinely hope that Franco Smith doesn't become the Scotland head coach before the Six Nations. That genuinely scares me. He is a top class coach over a top class club side
Yeah.
in Glasgow over in Scotland. And look, that's kind of ties in nicely to 2026 because I look at it and I've pieces written and I talk about like who I want to see blooded in. And I'm just um I could nearly throw that together for you. I actually don't have it on me. But like I'm looking at Scott Wilson, I'm looking at Edwin Adogbo, Brian Gleeson, Nathan Doak, Jude Bosthwaite, Dan Kelly, um, just to name a few, David McCann potentially, Sam Elo again on the tight head side, another one potentially in terms of new caps. But this is the big one. We don't tend to rotate in Six Nations, anyways. And it's a different format, and I think that could potentially impact things as well because you don't
Yeah, it's
necessarily
more
know your
compressed,
flow.
isn't it?
It's more compressed, there's only 1 week
Yeah.
off. Um, so you have a situation where potentially, hope not, touch wood, hope not, Ireland could be 1 win from three to start, then they have a week off. Well, you're not going to rotate for Wales then because you cannot afford to lose. But if you win in London or in Paris, that Scotland game becomes you're fighting for a title. So like it is very difficult. But you also have like the summer. Are you going to rotate for Australia down there? No. You're not going to rotate in Eden Park. Like that would be lambs to slaughter. The French would. Maybe we should follow the French model. Like I'm throwing it out there now.
Yeah.
Australia, Japan, New Zealand. Would you take a loss against New Zealand and blood a heap of and I second layer players? So
Yeah.
your Paddy McCarthy's, your Cormac
Yeah.
Isachukwu's, your even Craig Casey because he has not been backed yet. Would you take it? And I'm going to ask both of you. Start yourself, Adam. Would you take a French summer? Not the
Yes.
weather. We'll take the weather. Would you take a French summer?
Yes, 100%. I feel like this, this, it's not going to happen because they're going to try and make this nation's champions thing into the best play the best. And, there's
Like
going to be
every
that
other
whole,
sport in the world, it's so
yeah,
annoying. But
it,
yes,
it is going to be, as I say, and as I keep on saying, the poster boys of Irish rugby, of the ones that are always on the social media posts when it comes to like Doris, Byrne, Aki, the ones that you know. And the ones that the armchair, like the fans that will occasionally watch Irish rugby know, they all know, they're all household names. But those are the type of players that we will see. But would I take a French summer? I would 100% take a French summer. To try, most of those players that you've mentioned wouldn't have went down Southern Hemisphere to play rugby anyway. It'd be valuable to get those players in that time to play in the Southern Hemisphere, especially when there's an Australian World Cup coming around the corner. Like they would have played in South Africa, I understand, but I feel like Australia with the travel, it'd be a different atmosphere completely. It'd be a different type of feeling to how you rest your body after the things and stuff, all of that stuff, all the sort of sciencey bit to it as well. I feel like purely for that reason, I'd take a French summer and to get a couple of losses to build up the character. As David said, we'd probably learn more from this loss than if we would have won in those last 10 minutes. We still would have had the cards, we still would have had the red, speaking completely hypothetically. But because we've lost twice, we're starting to think, hopefully, in a more progressive route for this team. Because as I think Hugh put in the group chat for the United Rugby Championship, 13 of 4, the 13 of those players that started on the weekend played against Scotland in 2022. That's wild. There's no progression in that squad at all.
And would you be surprised if the same 13 line out in Paris in
Well,
10 weeks' time?
that's the thing David
You know?
mentioned about being comfortable. Players are getting really comfortable, and we're seeing that worry start to set in. I think you mentioned on the in the anthems, there was about three or four of them, like not like crying because of emotion of the game and stuff. They were genuinely looking like they were fearing for their lives. Like
I thought that as well. I thought they were bricking it.
Gary Ringrose did not look up once during any of the anthems. And I was just like, he doesn't look like he's ready. You have when you look at times gone by where players cry at the anthems, you have the ones that are genuinely focused, they want to win the game. Ringrose looked like he was bricking it. There's a few of them looked like they were just absolutely bricking it. And to have that in the camp, to have whatever the coach is saying, whatever Andy Farrell's saying before the game, to make you brick it is not the right way of going about it, I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's actually a great point because I completely forgot that, but I did say it at the time.
Yeah.
I was like, geez, Ireland look nervous.
Yeah.
And the last time I remember Ireland looking nervous before a game was the World Cup quarter final in 23. But we will not discuss that. That is banned. That is embargoed. Bold. David, back to the original question. Would you take a French summer in 2026?
I think I'd take a caveated one. I mean, I'd almost be willing to give up a game at Eden Park because we're not winning there anyway. But
History says no.
yeah, history tends to say no on that one. I don't know. I do think there's a balance because I think I mean, the main thing I would say is France is great, lovely country, delightful weather, people are charming, but it's a much bigger country. They have 14 professional teams. Then they have the Pro D2. Like they have a lot of professional players who have a lot of game time and a lot of minutes. So they're not going in like these aren't neophytes going in and playing. While I
But
would like to
that's not what I'm
see,
asking here. I'm
yeah, I
asking for
know,
your
but
Dan
like
Kellys, your Jacob Stockdales.
I
One
don't want a team
team,
of guy I don't want a team of lads who are going to get slaughtered. Because while there's a lot to be
really?
lost, there's a lot to be got in a loss. The manner of the loss does matter as well. Now maybe if it's a mid-level team, possibly. But yeah, I'd be all for massive amounts of rotation. I don't if we're going to lose down there, I don't get anything out of seeing, Dan Sheehan and Ty Burn losing
Yeah,
a match in Eden Park more than I
yeah,
get out of watching, I don't know, Lee Barn and Darren Murray, and what an experience for those guys to play there. So, yeah, I just think unfortunately, I think given that this is the first season of this Nation series, I can't possibly see it ever happening. It is unfortunate we don't have a summer tour like the way the French went down to Australia and almost won it. To be fair to them, Louis Carbonell, very good, but yeah, no, if we could actually do that, and yeah, we do have players. You're right. If we had someone like Dan, if we had people like
oh,
It feels like we're losing him. David, if you can hear us, you can just stop there for a second because it feels like you've cut out. Adam, To kind
Jacob
of,
Stock
oh, well,
out. And God,
well,
Oh,
just
Sid,
if David
stop
can hear
showing
us, he
Sid's
could pause
notebook.
there for a second. Adam, just to wrap the whole thing up, then, um, going into 2026, are you more confident or less confident than before the window started?
Less confident. I feel like for I think purely on that stat alone that the 2022 team against Scotland was the
That
same.
spooked you.
It really did spook me, and we're a month out from Halloween, and that was the most frightening thing to happen to me. I feel like there is that moment where, I feel like in the professional era, when David, you mentioned about getting thrashed down at Eden Park, was it the 60-0 against when Johnny
60
Sexton
nil in Hamilton. Yeah.
60-0 in Hamilton? That was the start of this whole era of us being dominant. That was the pick point. That was the sort of pin where I think Johnny Sexton mentioned in his book, and I did read it. I've got the two books. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But he always said, he put in his book, I think, Becoming a Lion, and that was the pinpoint for this Ireland regeneration. That's when we got Joe Schmidt in as a national coach. That's the whole, trying out different things and the whole push around, sort of like that sort of back off, kidney. We're gonna move on now. That was the pinpoint. We need something like that to happen. We need something to sort of. We need to get absolutely. Well, do we need to get absolutely thrashed, but play all of our starting team and actually make that point? Possibly. I do like what David said. Like, do I feel like a game where I watch Ireland getting pummeled 60-0 and Dan Sheehan's on the pitch and Jack Crawley, you've got all those two players that are playing. Do I feel like that's beneficial at all? No. However, if we do play these young players and we do get thrashed, there's character building there. There's that experience. There's that getting used to the test match feel. We need to look new look. We always talk about World Cup, World Cup, World Cup because there's a stigmatism there. We've never gotten out of a quarter final. At the minute, we're looking like almost like an England 2015 team with our age profile and how we could struggle to get out of this pool stage. We need to be looking at semi-final or minimum. And I feel like as an Ireland fan over the past 9 years that Andy Farrell's been in charge, is 2023 the closest we'll get? Hopefully not. Hopefully there's some change. Hopefully there's a big like wondering why, scratch of the head, this is why.
Yeah.
Maybe that is Andrew Goodman leaving to go to New Zealand and getting somebody else in. It'll probably be Jonathan Sexton now I think about it. What am I saying?
It probably will. Promote from within, continuity, etc., is the name of the game. Gents, I'd love to do some URC chat, but unfortunately we are running out of time, so just go run through it really quickly. First game of the week, Ulster against Benetton. Adam, you confident?
Yes, we're getting all of our best players back essentially at the same time. It's
Well, kind of.
kind of, yeah.
Dragons against Leinster, David.
has to be.
Has to be win, yeah. Dragons, I know it's look, Leinster should be overwhelming favourites, even though they are a little bit light in certain positions.
We're
Look,
very light in certain positions.
looking at second row
Very
and
worrying
centre.
injury report came out of Leinster yesterday. But yeah,
Yeah,
we should be okay. We were able to get past their brains. They were a better team than Dragons, so yeah, we should be
yeah,
all right.
that's good context. Connacht against Sharks, I have to say I do think Connacht will win this, having looked at that Sharks squad. But you just never know what Sharks team is going to turn up. And also laterally, you kind of don't know Connacht. They've a bad record against South Africans at home. They've lost to the Lions, lost to the Bulls. I think they have beaten the Sharks in all their visits to Galway, but that could be a motivator. And then finally, Munster against Stormers. Game of the week, probably. Like the two unbeaten teams left, someone has to lose their record. Seemingly, Munster are going to be quite strong when the team gets announced. We shall wait and see on that one. Stormers have no players back from box camp. Granted, they don't have the most amount of box either. So, but there's no Sasha, no Willemse. Isn't that enough potentially for them? Hopefully, because it hasn't happened in basically a season and a half. Hopefully, we finally get four provincial wins on the same week. If we do, we'll all be back next week. We'll be over the moon. But that is all that we have time for tonight. My thanks to Adam and to David. Ben unfortunately couldn't make it with us this evening, but I'm sure he is over the moon. I mean, sorry, deflated at Ireland's performance. I know. If you do like what you see here, please make sure to like and subscribe. Subscribe to Global Game Line on YouTube, to the Interpro Show, wherever you get your podcasts. Give us your thoughts. French summer? Question mark. That's going to be the discussion point. But from us, until next time, take it easy.